Good evening, everyone. I'm Sharon Goldstein, and I'm the Director of Day School Programs at Gateways. And I want to welcome you all to our third webinar this year in our mental health series. Our mission at Gateways is to provide high-quality special education services, expertise, and support to enable students with diverse learning needs to succeed in Jewish educational settings and participate meaningfully in Jewish life. Gateways has expanded our programming in the area of mental health and wellness, with goals to raise awareness, decrease stigma, and provide tools to support our young people who are struggling with mental illness and challenges. We offer educational trainings, such as this one, to parents and educators. We partner with the Brookline Center for Mental Health to bring mental health clinicians into local Jewish day schools to provide individual therapy with students and offer wellness programming. And we've established a bridge program in 2 of the local day schools for students in need of additional mental health support. We're so grateful to the Miriam Fund of Boston's Combined Jewish Philanthropies for sponsoring this important webinar series. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Rachel Shine, who will introduce our speakers and share the format for the night. Rachel.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon. So I first want to introduce Katrina Paschke. Katrina is a master's student at the University of South Florida studying clinical rehab and mental health counseling. And she is also completing a certificate in marriage and family therapy and plans on specializing in trauma and grief. Katrina enjoys writing and practicing mindfulness. And in just a minute, Katrina is going to share her own journey with us. But before she does that, I'd love to introduce Donna Jackson Nakazawa, who is an award-winning journalist and author, and who is internationally recognized for the work that she has done on the intersection of neuroscience, immunology, and human emotion. Her mission is to translate emerging science in ways that help foster healing. Her latest book, which we're going to be hearing about tonight, Girls on the Brink, Helping Our Daughters Thrive in an Era of Increased Anxiety, Depression, and Social Media, was named one of the best health books of 2022 by the Washington Post. And I was first introduced to Donna when I read her book, Childhood Disrupted, How Your Biography Becomes Your Biology and How You Can Heal, which focuses on how adverse childhood experiences impact our bodies and our growth. And so we are so excited to have both Donna and Katrina with us tonight. And I'm really excited to hear Katrina speak first and share her story with us.
Hi, thank you all for being here tonight. So I'm just going to go over my own mental health journey and how anxiety has affected me throughout my life. So for me, it really kind of manifested even in my childhood. I remember always being an anxious child where little things would really stress me out more than most people, I think. I remember even things like storms would really terrify me, or if I felt a pain in my chest, I would worry about not waking up the next morning. Just really extreme reactions to small manifestations. And I really believe now that those manifestations in my body were the physical symptoms of anxiety. And I think that with anxiety, for me, it's definitely been biological, but it's also been, I think, learned as well too, because I've also really watched it with my own family members. Even when my mom would get anxious when she was driving, I picked up on those behaviors. So then when I learned to drive, it was a terrifying experience for me. But what's really helped me with my anxiety over the years is really going in small steps. So even something like this, talking in front of people, is something that I think years ago, I would let my anxiety get the best of me. But I took small steps. I work as a writing tutor for a community college, and one thing that we had to do was do little orientations, go around to classrooms and explain our services, and even that would terrify me. But I started to change my perspective and realize that I'm sharing something I'm passionate about, a service that can help others. And another experience that really also helped me with that is I participated in This Is My Brave, where I stood up on stage and at my college and shared my story with a poem that I'd written about my experiences with anxiety. And again, years ago, I don't know how I would have been able to do it, but I took those small steps. I started with doing orientations at my work. Then with This Is My Brave, with the rehearsals, I would practice in front of the other cast members, sharing my story. And then I just slowly worked up. So to me, I think taking those small steps has been very helpful. Even with driving, if I have to go somewhere that I don't know yet, that's far, I'll practice by watching someone, going in the car with someone and just taking notes on the route. Then I'll go with them, and next I'll be the one driving. And I just take those, little steps. And I think that for me, really trying to create a calming atmosphere within my physical body has also been helpful. So things like breathing exercises has been helpful, grounding exercises, doing little things like taking back roads if I'm not comfortable yet driving on the interstate. I think that there's nothing wrong with listening to your body and your mind and doing the things that really work best for you. Something else that has helped my anxiety a lot has been challenging my thoughts. So oftentimes I'll write down a list of the things that I'm worried about, and I figure out if it's something that I can control or if it's something that I can't. So with the master's program that I'm in, if I'm worried about passing a test, I know that I can control the things like studying and working on controlling my anxiety. But there are many things that I can't control. Like even with driving, I can control my own driving and being a safe driver, but I can't control the outside world or the other drivers. And really recognizing the difference between what I can do and what I can't has actually been another thing that's been quite helpful for me. And I think the other thing with anxiety that has really been important to remember is it's something that ebbs and flows. And in our world, there are so many factors that we deal with today, like social media and so many pressures where we can go online and see what other people are doing, where I think we didn't have that, years ago. There are a lot of new age pressures. And I've found that it's very important to be mindful of that and give ourselves grace if we are feeling insecure or anxious. I think that, there are many periods in our lives that can affect our mental health and how we're feeling at the moment. I know that one life factor that really impacted me at a young age, and I think that in children, it's something that can really affect them, their own, emotional development, was when I lost my grandpa, a figure who was very important to me. And that was the first major loss that I experienced. And that grief really, I think, really was a conduit to the depression and anxiety that was already in me. I think that it really, just really emotionally affected me. And one of the reasons that I'm really focused on studying and understanding and helping others through anxiety and grief is because of my own personal life experiences. Again, I think that mental illness, anxiety, and depression, it really can ebb and flow and pop up again depending on your life experiences. Today with my anxiety, the way I've looked at it is, again, it's a constant healing journey for me. Again, with the impact of grief, it's affected my life again, where I recently lost my sister, and she was my best friend. She had her own struggles with her mental health, and she struggled with substance use. And my mom and I spent our lives doing what we could to take care of her and make sure that she was as happy as possible. But, with this loss, it's, of course, it's made the anxiety crop up again and the depression. And it brings in so many new things that you worry about, where oftentimes I worry about losing other loved ones that I have or my own mortality. I think that events like this can really bring things into perspective, where oftentimes, if I'm working on something that I know I need to get done, or even focusing on my own self-care, I find myself feeling guilty for not spending time with those that I love. Or if I am spending time with those that I love, I feel guilty for not focusing on my own needs. And the way that I've tried to balance that is by really, again, sort of shifting my perspective, where I know if I've carved out a day to spend with loved ones, I know that that's important because those are the memories that do matter. And if I've carved out time for my own things, my own self-care, which could look like running errands or taking care of my physical health or just doing some of my creative interests, that's just as important too, because it, is the development of who I am. And so I think anxiety is really constantly trying to maintain that balance and working through some of your own feelings of perfectionism. I've really had to go on my own journey of self-love and healing. And since I love to write, I've even written a lot of letters to myself or to loved ones. And that's something that's really helped me with my anxiety, just getting those words out on paper, writing poetry, stories, journaling. So again, it's something that anxiety is something really that will show up differently in your life at different periods. I know that it has for me, but again, I think the biggest thing has been for me finding that self-love and compassion and knowing that all mental illnesses, they take such a physical toll on you, because with anxiety, your mind is just constantly running. And I've had to recognize that it's okay if I don't have as much energy as I want, that it's completely normal. Doing things like mindfulness practices and yoga really allows me to slow down and ultimately just recognize that it's so important to have compassion for myself. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to leave you with, just that reminder and message to have that compassion and forgiveness for yourself with all of the challenges that we experience in today's life, the new age problems and just, personal issues that we all experience. I think it's just so important to have that self-love and compassion in whatever ways that work best for you to find them. So thank you again, everyone, for being here and letting me share my story tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katrina. And Katrina will be here until the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Donna will present and I will be monitoring the Q&A. And so if you can put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat to me, and then we will do the Q&A after Donna's presentation at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katrina. That was just such a lovely way to start the evening.
Thank you.
And I feel honored to speak after you because you've lived this, you are of this generation that has had a lot more coming at you than previous generations, and just such a great role model to talk about the things that work for you, even while managing pretty severe grief and difficulty. So a deep bow to you. Thank you. All right, I am going to share my screen and I'm going to talk for about an hour. And then we'll take questions, and I'm happy to stay for as long as you guys have questions. So let's do this. And always takes me just a second to push all the right buttons. Okay, hopefully you guys are seeing what you should be seeing, which is slide 1. All right, so thank you for having me here this evening. We're going to be talking about all of the reporting and research that I did for my new book, Girls on the Brink. And I'm going to spend about half an hour sharing the latest science on female mental health across puberty and adolescence, and it's very new. And then we'll do a deep dive, I promise, into the neuroscience-based strategies for growing strong girls in these really, really complex and I would say troubled times. So I think that a good litmus test for the health of any society is really how well it treats its girls and how well its girls are faring. And if we use that as a measure, right, well, one thing becomes clear: we as a society, an American society, are failing pretty miserably. We know this because the statistics over the past decade tell us so. Depression is happening a lot earlier in girls than it did just a decade ago, often by ages 12 or 13. Girls are twice as likely as boys to suffer from anxiety. And in 2021, suicide attempts increased 51% among girls, compared with 4% among boys. Now, some of you may have seen last month that the CDC released its biannual report on youth and risk behavior. And this study showed that since 2021, the situation has only grown worse. In February, the CDC's report showed that, quote unquote, America's teen girls are engulfed in a growing wave of sadness, violence, and trauma. It's really not often, I can tell you as a reporter, it's not often that a government agency uses this kind of shocking language. Here's why they said that: because they found that 1 in 3 teenage girls today has seriously considered suicide, and 57% of girls now report feeling persistently sad or hopeless. We also are seeing a growing disparity between adolescent female and male mental health. This downward trend in girls' health, by the way, existed way before the pandemic. A study came out in 2019, a very well-known study showing that 1 in 3 girls were suffering from feelings of worthlessness. And now you can see it's up to 57%. So this disparity between girls and boys' mental health arises during puberty, and we're going to talk about that. And it continues to emerge as girls come of age. It cannot be explained by higher rates of awareness or diagnosis. I want to get that out of the way really quickly. Sometimes people ask me, well, how do you know? It's not just that girls are more willing to say they don't feel well or talk about it. Well, we know because public health doesn't measure these statistics that way. They measure them by actual lived behavior. Have you lost interest in activities? Is this such a shift in well-being that you've had to miss school? Are you unable to leave the house? And so when you get that Gestalt picture together, you can see that this isn't just about diagnosis. It's not just about people reporting their feelings. It's about girls losing their interest in their normal lives and activities because of that feeling of depression and worthlessness and guilt and shame. And we'll dig into why it's happening. Okay, real quick, what kind of stress are we talking about? I think it's really important. Girls tell me that the world they're living in today feels so stressful. They often feel like they can't make a difference, like there's nothing they can do. And it's not really surprising when you look around you. Now, when we look at the term stress, we really break that into 4 categories: household stressors, adversity a child faces in their own home, maybe a parent has a mental health disorder or a substance abuse issue. There are environmental stressors, right? Natural disasters, which we're seeing a lot of, the climate crisis, community stressors, the threat of racism, discrimination, poverty, community violence, school shootings. 60% of kids say they fear that their school will be the next school for a school shooting. And academics have really ratcheted up with more high pressure, earlier benchmarks with that eye on the college process. And in fact, 3 in 10 teens today report problems with perfectionism. And then we add this 4th domain, which we're really going to focus on here today, and that is social stressors. The emotional and interpersonal stressors in social milieus, they've always been around, right? Did you have a place to sit at the cafeteria? But as children live more of their lives online, and girls particularly are spending more of their lives on social media, navigating, liking, and being disliked and critiquing, these social stressors have become a real growing concern. And you all know that, and we will dig into it. So we have an entirely new understanding of what happens as girls approach puberty and how the developing brain makes sense of unrelenting stressors. And we now know that unrelenting chronic stress can affect the female developing body and brain in really unique ways. And this, coupled with the unique stressors that girls are facing as they come of age today, and simply growing up female in our society as it is at this moment, is a more important driver of today's mental health epidemic among girls than previously realized. Okay, so I keep talking about the new science about female adolescent mental health. So what do I mean by that? And why is it new? Why would we only be learning about the science of female adolescent mental health now in 2023? Well, it's only in 2016 that the NIH asked that sex differences be factored into research designs. Studies on how stress affects development relied solely on male research models, and that skewed research findings for a very long time. As one scientist put it, Marincini, who specializes in looking at the female brain across development at Pitt, says researchers didn't want those pesky hormones to get in their way. But the mechanisms by which chronic stress lead to depression and anxiety in females turns out to be different than in males. It's really similar to the research on heart disease, which until very recently, gender bias led to women dying in droves because the research had all been done on male research models and on men's hearts. Now, I want to pause here and I want to just tell you I'm the mother of a daughter and I'm the mother of a son, and I care equally about boys and girls. And it turns out that all of the books that I've written have been based on research done on the male brain. But I do want to stop here and just say that boys are struggling too. Of course they are. These are stressful times for all children. And anxiety disorders in boys often manifest a little differently as behavioral problems or attention issues, and they can be misdiagnosed. Boys facing depression are also still more likely to commit suicide compared to girls. That gap is narrowing, but the issues facing boys are also very, very challenging. That said, we now know that some of the challenges and mechanisms that the challenges that girls and boys face and the mechanisms by which these can flip into depression and anxiety can be very distinct. And I think it would be a disservice to girls to not delve into this, especially given today's statistics. And you may be asking another question. Why am I using terms like girls and boys and male and female in this talk? And what do I mean by that? Well, for the purposes of this talk, I'm focusing on biological differences between cisgender women and cisgender men, those who identify with a gender that has been assigned them at birth, although I might say biological sex differences or sex differences. So I want to be able to tell you how this new science on female adolescent development matters in terms of the LGBTQ plus community, and the transgender community, but I actually can't do that because we don't know. So my hope is that this research becomes more inclusive of transgender and non-binary individuals and how they fit into this framework. I wish I could answer that question for you, but right now we just don't know. So now that we've got some of those questions that you might be asking out of the way, let's just dig a little bit deeper into what the latest research tells us about how girls are doing. So what we see when we look at the recent body of statistic on girls' mental health is a major generational shift. We know that these skyrocketing rates of anxiety and depression are significantly higher for girls in this cohort who are ages 28 and younger. We know that girls' rates of depression and loneliness and suicide have been escalating like this since 2012. And we also know that girls in this cohort entered their teen years, yes, during the smartphone and social media era. Now, we're going to talk about social media for a few minutes, then we'll get into some of the science of female adolescent brain development. So we know quite a few things about social media and health. The more time a girl spends on social media, the more likely she is to develop depressive symptoms. This association is stronger for girls than boys. 40% of teens say they began feeling unattractive when they started using Instagram. Many felt that app undermined rather than solidified their friendships. And teens say on surveys they want to spend less time on social media, but they also say they lack the self-control to do so. And we're going to talk about that later in this talk. And girls spend twice as much time on social media than boys. Now, the majority of girls today are using these apps between 8 and 13, even though users are supposed to be 13 to have an account. And in 2012, as I said, when we started to see this rate of suicide and depression rise in girls, guess what? That was around the time that Facebook added a like button and Twitter added the reshare button. And Meta's own internal research shows that among girls who feel bad about their bodies, 32% said using Instagram made them feel worse. So why do girls feel so much worse on social media? Well, it's not rocket science. They're more likely to meet up with critical and negative sexist messaging about their body, their face, and their appearance. And much of that messaging on social media sexualizes the female body at increasingly younger ages. There's literally no distinction between a girl's body being seen as older sexualized women and women being sexualized for looking younger. That line has just become blurred. And we know, as I said, the more time a girl is on social media, the more likely she is to develop depression and anxiety. And among girls and boys who use social media for equal amounts of time, same amount of time, girls are more likely to develop depression. So a lot of it has to do with the fact that clickbait algorithms intentionally drive derisive comments, and those include girls being critiqued, disliked, made fun of, shamed for their bodies. And we also know that spending a lot of time online leads to feelings of what researchers call upward comparison, by seeing other people and thinking that you must be doing very poorly as you scroll and stare and despair. Bodies and faces and lives are edited into this state of unreal female perfection that no human female can live up to. And we also know that social media has really cranked up the volume on misogynistic voices and views, and girls see all of this on social media. Well, even a well-loved girl's sense of who she is, even if everyone at home and her teachers are telling her that the world is her oyster and that has her whole future ahead of her with all her skills and attributes and that she can do anything, even that girl's sense of who she is will diminish over time amid an avalanche of sexist messaging, really regardless of the positive messages that the immediate community gives. If girls are spending a lot of time on social media, they're encountering more destructive messages from the outside world about what we as the adults, right, are willing to normalize when it comes to the treatment of and equality of women and girls. And our voices cannot always compete with the sexist cultural vibe. So what happens to a child's brain on social media? Well, when kids are scrolling, the reward system in the brain gets activated in a very similar way that it might for you or me if we thought about winning the lottery. Somebody saying, here's your winning ticket. And over time, perusing liked posts and what other teens like, including posts showing high risk behaviors, starts to turn off the brain's be careful filter, which over time, researchers can show alters the capacity for good decision making. This is why your child might say to you, I know, I'm not going to have any beer at so-and-so's party. But after being on social media and seeing a lot of visual images, which have a much bigger impact on the brain and more quickly than words, and seeing everybody drinking at parties for, the entire semester, that is more likely to have an effect and influence them to flip their decision after you drive away. And as I said, images especially evoke this strong physical reaction and inspire kids and teens to mimic even high health risk behaviors. All right, well, so that's the fun of social media. I want to pivot here for just a minute and talk about how childhood has changed in other ways for girls. We've really stolen away what I call girls in between years. Between the ages of 7 and 13, girls traditionally have a little bit of time to kind of not be high pressure, not be playing club sports, not be worrying about college, and just deepen their friendships and lie on the grass and talk to their friends and explore their identity and develop emotionally and physically without so much pressure. There wasn't this outside eye of posting everything on social media either. And these were years in which girls were very free to learn what genuine bonding in relationships felt like versus being liked and disliked online, and what it feels to really safely explore your world and what sparks your interest. These years are a really crucial bridge between childhood and adolescence. A ton is happening in the brain during this time. We'll get into that in just a second. Well, we've taken all of that away and we've really replaced it with a period marked with more competition, more threat and reward judgments on social media, and earlier sexualization when girls are still quite young. And we have a growing kind of familial isolationism, which adds to the stress burden. Families are more isolated than they were, especially after the pandemic, at a time when teens really need to know that the community and society has their back before they go out into the world on their own. So this is a loss of what was once that really extended safe period, a safe passage from childhood into the teenage years. And girls tell me, and I think we can all look around in our lives and agree, that girls really just don't have that safe passage anymore. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how our lived environment shapes brain health and particularly how that happens for girls. So the developing brain is really a detective. It's always on the lookout for possible threats. Every second, the developing brain is just dancing with the environment and it cares about one question more than any other. Am I safe here or am I not safe? The nervous system is just always poised to detect danger in our environment. That's really our source code as humans. And for those with a history of childhood adversity, that sense of hypervigilance can be even more acute. So how is it that chronic unpredictable stress affects the developing brain and body in general? Well, we know that when individuals are experiencing stress and they get into fight, flight, freeze, that stress response stays on more and more of the time. And when that stress response is on and we're caught in fight, flight, freeze as a child, often, and we don't know when the next stressor is coming, that means that the body and brain can begin to flood and marinate with an increase of inflammatory chemicals and stress hormones. Now, over time, that influx of stress hormones and chemicals can lead to epigenetic changes in genes that set the stress response for life. So what do I mean by that? Imagine that the stress response is like a garden hose, and you want to turn it off and you want to turn it off. Something stressful happens, you want to turn it off. Stressor ends, you want to turn it on. Stressor ends, you want to turn it off. In kids who face adversity growing up, unpredictable chronic stress, and they don't know when the next stressor is coming, that garden hose gets turned on, and the genes that oversee how well it will turn on and turn off as stressors come and go in life, they shift, they change in a process called epigenetics, and that shift happens in a way that that stress response gets turned on. Over time, that influences genes for depression and anxiety and mental health concerns. And this can lead to significant changes in the immune system and the architecture of the developing brain. So to help bring home how stressful this era is, I want to talk for a few minutes about a new and burgeoning area of research called social safety theory. And this is really important because social stress is a particularly acute type of stress in kids' lives, and particularly, as we've been talking about, in girls' lives. So why would that be? Well, it's rooted in our evolutionary past, a time when traumatic experiences could mean death much more so than they do in modern life. So let's go way back in time. Early in human history, being excluded was a warning sign that you might soon be left behind, and that would set you up for starvation or vulnerability to predators. And for this reason, emotional stress alerts the body and brain to prepare for physical danger. Now, George Slavich at UCLA, a professor of psychiatry, has coined a useful term for this. It's called social safety theory. So let's dig into it for just a minute. Across evolutionary time, thriving in human societies, it depended on a lot of close collaboration, right? If you were going to have food and shelter and your children were going to be protected, you needed to be getting along with everybody to make that happen. And being left out, being made fun of, being dismissed or dissed, or having people roll their eyes at you around the communal fire might mean that you were going to be left behind while the group went out and gathered food. You might be the last person to get the meat off the communal fire. That meant less nutrition and more vulnerability to disease for you and your offspring. At the outskirts of the tribe, you would also be much more likely to not hear an alarm if a predator were nearby, or to be attacked by a predator or a warring tribe. And if you were fully ostracized, yep, you're all the way out of the tribe. No food, no shelter, no protection. All of these things made you more likely to face the elements, starvation, predators, and that made you more likely to be wounded and face infection. So what I am saying here in a nutshell is that across evolutionary time, our immune systems evolved to prick up really, really loudly in the face of social stress, because our evolutionary history, if we were being dismissed or made fun of, it was a sign that we might be physically harmed, and our immune system had to get ready. So given the ill effects that could follow a small social slight, it made sense anthropologically that facing even small signs of being ostracized would cause the immune system to rev up at the very first sign of being left out. So the immune system and the nervous system evolved to respond to emotional stress as if it is a physical threat. Even in modern times, right? That sense of being left out, or that perceived slight, can signal the immune system to go on overdrive. Just a hint of social threat or adversity, feeling rejected, worrying if your friend likes you. Did you say the wrong thing? Being made fun of by a clique at school, being made fun of online, prick up the immune system. None of this is going to lead to you being physically wounded, but to the developing brain, it feels as if it will. So the unique pressures that girls are facing today, particularly on social media, are triggering this huge mismatch between deep, long-standing evolutionary wiring and modern life. The brain immune wiring in the face of social threats, that's been around for a lot longer than social media. This is what evolutionary biologists refer to as a classic evolutionary mismatch. A social threat triggers a harmful biophysical response in the body and brain, even if those feelings are unrealistic in response to being made fun of on Instagram or TikTok. So a very interesting study I want to throw out there out of Dell Medical School at University of Texas at Austin found that early childhood adversity is statistically the single biggest contributor, more than any other single gene, to an individual's risk of later developing neuropsychiatric disorders. And they concluded the reason was because of these heightened levels of inflammatory factors, which contribute to disease vulnerability. So we're talking about that ratcheted up stress immune response that over time begins to affect mental health and well-being. So I'm going to start talking about the role of estrogen in the stress response and how it's shaped during puberty. But before I do that, I just want to state, because I speak from a feminist perspective and I write from a feminist perspective, I want to say very, very clearly here that estrogen, along with so many other aspects of being female, has long been used as a reason to diminish women. So let's just set that straight right now. Estrogen is a superpower hormone. It enhances every cell in the body. It is enormously protective in the right circumstances, offering all kinds of evolutionary advantages. Estrogen is the reason why females can do everything males can do during a typical day, but do it in smaller bodies with smaller organs while still making room for a uterus to carry another life. Estrogen also does something else. It boosts our immune system. It's the reason why women have more robust responses to vaccines and lots of other things. Now, the brain is where puberty first begins. At puberty, the brain is like a computer system, a computer chess game. It factors in all the past moves on the chessboard. In this case, all the social and emotional threats and stress that you faced in your life, including in your current environment. And when there have been repeated threats, whether they are physical, social, or virtual, estrogen, as puberty comes in and estrogen surges in, can jack up the immune system and the body and brain stress machinery in ways that testosterone does not. And this can amplify what we talked about earlier, where when there is a lot of chronic stress, that stress response never has a chance to turn off. Estrogen stops being protective. It flips to an evolutionary disadvantage, exacerbating that stress immune response. And that can lead to heightened inflammation, which affects the architecture of the brain and the function of the immune system. So what that means is that at puberty, when there has been a lot of chronic stress, as the brain begins to remodel, this is why at puberty, we can see that exacerbated neural pruning process where there is an over pruning of even necessary and needed neural connections in the brain. And this can determine how well the brain wires and fires up for lifelong mental health. Okay, so I said it's only recently we looked at female adolescent brain health in the face of stress. So it was long assumed by studying the male brain, we would know how the female brain and the female immune system and brain crosstalk, but that turned out not to be the case. And we thought we knew how the female brain would respond to stress. Nope. It turns out the mechanisms by which chronic stress leads to depression in females is very different than in males. So here's just one instance. Of course, I've written about many, many differences between the developing female and male brain in Girls on the Brink, but here's just one that I find really fascinating. In the face of emotionally stressful events, girls' brains show greater activity in the left amygdala. Now, the left amygdala is that alert center in the brain, and the left amygdala is associated with rumination in response to fear and stress. And rumination, what do I mean by that? It's those negative feelings and thoughts about oneself, one's actions, blaming oneself, blaming others, versus taking action. And conversely, boys' brains show more activity in areas that are associated with distraction and action. So we know that high rumination with low action, which is what we're talking about here for girls, increases the risk of anxiety and depression. Again, it's a stressful era for boys. We talked about that earlier. So we've talked about how more is coming at children earlier from all directions. And we have to talk about one more thing that's different for today's girls, and that is that puberty is happening much earlier for girls at a time when the brain is not ready for it. Puberty is happening 2 years earlier for girls on average. Now, puberty used to be underway before adolescence. So puberty, adolescence. But now, sorry. I don't know why I'm mixing up my words tonight. Bear with me. I think because it's after 8 o'clock. So sorry. Adolescence used to be underway before puberty, right? So now puberty is beginning before adolescence. And since at puberty, hormones are coming in, this is a problem because it's during adolescence that the brain figures out how to handle and respond to social and emotional cues and interactions. But as puberty comes in earlier, the parts of the brain that know how to respond to social emotional distress, put stress in context, analyze thoughts and emotions, discern when it's time to ask for help, what's serious and what's not, or how to handle hard things. Those parts of the brain have not wired and fired up yet. They have not yet matured. So when puberty is happening before adolescence, that means the brain is getting remodeled at a time when it should not be. And this is part of the reason that we're seeing this vulnerability in girls. Normal brain remodeling that should happen during adolescence happens at the wrong time. The brain is being shaped at the wrong time by the wrong things. And this is a big part of the reason why we see this growing crisis in female adolescent mental health. Okay, I promised I would pivot to what we can do, and I'm sure you're all ready for that. I know that I always am after sharing the science. And I want to emphasize here that many of these antidotes and strategies that I'm about to share can be just as easily applied to raising sons. Honestly, if we applied many of these to raising sons, it would help boys, and it would also be part of the solution for raising girls. Making things right for girls means, I think, making things right for all children. Certainly how we raise our sons impacts the lives of girls and the women they will become. So the good news is that when I talked about some of that amplified hormonal superpower earlier, it turns out that the robust aspects of the female stress response also afford girls, under the right conditions, enormous possibilities for well-being. So I think knowing this science is really, really empowering for families and schools and communities, because we also know that when we have this wide open time for girls' development, for their brain health and their mental health across their lifespan, that all of this is happening at this time, we want to also step in and remember that that makes adolescence a time full of unimaginable promise. It's a golden period which can be marked by learning and possibility and growth. So much depends on the emotional and social and environmental terrain in which girls come of age. And the way I think that we want to look at it is that everything we can do to bring down that stress machinery matters. And as levels of chronic toxic stress rise exponentially in girls' lives, we must increase levels of psychological safety. So what is a neuroprotective environment? It's one which really fosters a sense of being safely seen and deeply connected and valued, and that this has been set in place by parents and mentors and communities. You could think of each of these spheres in a girl's life surrounding her like neuroprotective layers, like Russian tea dolls, which stack inside of each other. And when we have these neuroprotective spheres, then that's what ensures that each girl within those spheres, that smallest figure at the center, feels safe within herself. I think the goal is for each of us in whatever role we play in girls' lives, whether you're here as a parent or an educator or a therapist, to help make this difficult passage into adulthood smoother, easier, and therefore really more joyful. So this journey has to begin with us. If as parents, our own trauma remains unresolved and unexamined, or we're facing high levels of stress and overwhelm, our brains cannot access the kind of higher level thinking that we need to be the parents we want to be for our children. And if we've had a lot of trauma, our own trauma can become the lens through which our daughter's experiences are viewed, including how well we feel we are prepared to help her in the moment. So the first rule is parents manage your own stuff. It is impossible to soothe a child when you're caught up in trying to soothe and regulate yourself. When we're caught up in our own big reactions, those red hot feelings, those worries, those concerns, we just can't be the calm adult who helps regulate our child's stress response. Science tells us that children and teens' neurobiology mirrors our own. Our kids borrow our composure, and it is our composure that helps re-regulate their brains and brings down their stress machinery. We can thank mirror neurons in the brain for this. When we enter a state of calm, our child starts to mirror that. They start to breathe more deeply. They start to relax. There's a fancy word for this. It's called parent-child attunement. And again, it means noticing the links between your own experiences and what activates your nervous system so that you can pause, draw upon a toolbox to regulate your nervous system first, and then offer up a state of calm from every cell of you to every cell in your daughter. Now, parents are often overconfident in their ability to see their child's moods clearly. 90% of parents say that they would feel pretty confident that they would recognize signs of depression in their child. But 2/3 also admit that they can't really tell the difference between ups and downs and depression. And half of parents are unaware when their child is having suicidal thoughts. So we don't always have insight into our daughter's state of mind. And I think this compounds today's mental health crisis for girls. If we don't know they're struggling, we can't really intervene to help them. Girls also report feeling more comfortable disagreeing or blowing off their moms than they do with their dads, which I think is kind of interesting. You might want to bear that in mind. All right, so when we talk about a parent's own managing their own stuff, I just want to take a tiny little 1-minute break here and ask you to do a thought experiment. If you could you might want to close your eyes. It's just going to take 60 seconds. Think back to the most difficult moments you've experienced in your life as a parent. And ask yourself, what was the emotional climate like in the house? Was it a climate of parent-child attunement? Were you in a calm state, offering up that calm for your child? And it's okay if the answers are messy, of course they are. And now let's go a little bit further back in time to your own childhood living room. And think about a time when your family faced really, really difficult times. Maybe a family member had something really big happen, or there were big negative emotions or a crisis. And reflect on the emotional tenor of your childhood home at that time. And ask yourself, when you were hurting as a child or a teenager, could you safely turn to, be honest and be vulnerable with, and be validated and soothed by your mother? no matter how difficult the problem. How about by your father? Okay, so if you closed your eyes, let's open them and talk about what this means. It turns out that the odds of a child or teen flourishing are 12 times greater. Wrap your head around that. 12 times greater for children whose parents responded very well versus not very well or not at all to one question: how well can you and this child talk about ideas or things that really, really matter? So that is one of the most important things, is that we want to be the person our daughter can turn to talk about hard things. This is a super strong predictor of a child's well-being. Teens with more positive relationships with parents also show less overactivation in neural areas of the brain that are associated with high health risk behaviors. If we want to just put it in a few words, the opposite of trauma is connection. The goal here as parents is to create psychological safety, right? That interior belief your child just knows that they can speak their ideas, take risks without fear of ridicule, humiliation, retaliation. And when a girl is agitated and experiences her distress in the presence of that nurturing, loving adult, her nervous system goes down, her amygdala, and is less likely to be stuck in fight, flight, freeze. And guess what happens then? She's more able to tell you what's really, really going on. One really lovely study I want to share showed that female teens who always felt they could go to their mother for anything they needed, emotional or physical, and who felt fully accepted regardless of their appearance or what they disagreed about, scored highest as young adult women on body image, on having a positive body image. And they were also more likely to resist societal messages that their bodies were defined, that their bodies defined their worth as women. Another really interesting study I want to share with you talked about how important it is that kids have positive experiences and how protective these particular positive childhood experiences, or what we call PCEs, are in terms of protecting against the ill effects of adversity and stress. So again, we see a family being able to talk about their feelings, feeling that your family had your back at difficult times, participating in community traditions, feeling a sense of belonging in high school, being supported by friends, having at least 2 non-parent adults who took a genuine interest in them, and feeling safe and protected by an adult in the home. Those with 6 or 7 of these positive childhood experiences had a likelihood of depression that was 72% lower than those who had just 0 to 2 of these positive childhood experiences. So in interviewing girls for the past several years, it became really clear to me that girls would like it if we would teach more parent communication skills, especially for parents of girls during those preteen and teen years. There is, it turns out, an art and a science to talking to girls in neuroprotective ways. So I'm going to run through some basics, some of which you'll know, to see them as good reminders, right? We know that when teens don't feel heard or seen or validated, they get louder, they might be irritable, they might act out, or oftentimes girls become really quiet and withdraw. And then again, we don't know what they're really feeling. So sometimes we have to walk up to the fact that high stakes situations and conversations can be hard to discuss. So here are a few things, if you feel like your daughter is struggling, that you might use as openers for conversations. Hey, this topic is hard to talk about, even for me as an adult. Or, hey, let's just talk. I promise I won't react. I just want you to feel free to say or ask whatever you want. Or, hey, let's communicate about this. We don't want to brush these things under the rug. Or, and let me tell you, girls love this. My promise to you is that I will be a good listener. I will not ask a single question. So neurobiological attunement, or parent-child attunement, means really avoiding jumping in as that fixer or detective. It means all of those validating statements that we all want to practice so that we're ready to use them when the moment arises. That sounds so frustrating. That sounds incredibly hard. If I were in your shoes, I feel that way too. Let me see if I've got this right so far. So you feel X about Y. Can you say more about that? I'd like to hear more about your thoughts. A study showed that when we talk to attentive listeners, we volunteer more information, we give more details, we elaborate more, even and especially when the listener does not ask a single question. So let's say you are trying all of these things in your conversations with your daughter, and they jump in and you're being so great. You're going, I'm not going to be the detective. I'm not going to be the fixer. I'm just here to listen. And your daughter says, well, what do you think? Tell me what I should do. Here's a good one for you. I promise I'll tell you what I think. But first, I really want to know more about what you think, because what you think right now is more important than what I think. And be sure that in these difficult conversations, when you want your child to turn to you with hard things, that you ask permission before you share observations. What does that look like? It looks like, hey, would it be okay if I offered a suggestion? Or I just want to run something by you. If you make a mistake, and you will, if you're a parent, well, I've done a lot of talks, and when we're in a room, I ask parents to raise their hand. They've never messed up while talking to their kid, and I've never seen a hand yet. Science tells us that if you mess up, just make a repair. It's pretty easy. And guess what? If you make a repair, instead of your child's brain staying in fight, flight, freeze, and that amygdala being all revved up, whew, the brain quiets right down. So, hey, when I said that, it came out wrong. I'm sorry. Can we hit the reset button and try it again? Or I lost it. I wish I hadn't said that. I'm really sorry. Or I want to be helpful, and clearly that wasn't helpful. Can you help me understand what it would be most beneficial for you to hear right now? And admit you don't have all the answers. The sooner you make a repair after you mess up, the less likely an unhappy memory will stick in your child's brain. Remember too, please, that the adolescent brain is so wired up to be hypervigilant in the face of assessment and evaluation. Please be extra careful about comments that judge girls' actions. The message here is we want to reassure them that it's their qualities and values and relationships and their mental and physical health that matter most. So we want to drop back from evaluating kids for performance-based achievements instead of, you did great on your math test, or you were the fastest runner. Try drawing on messages that showcase their deeper intrinsic qualities. I see the hard work you put into this. Your determination really pays off. How do you feel? You're so creative. Look at the thought you put into doing this project. I notice you always follow through on little things. It takes effort, and it's a wonderful quality. Your job is not to be the best. Your job is to grow up, to be a good person, and so on and so on and so on. What I like to tell parents is you want to spend less time trying to shape your child toward perfection and more time crafting messages with the sentiment that you would want your child to find if they were to find a note you wrote to them after you were no longer on this planet. That is the sentiment we want to do with we want to offer up to our girls, that sense of safety and connection. Of course, you've got to leave room for a little wobble. Kids have to face safe stressors, and we want to make sure that we don't over coddle them. So if it's a child-sized stressor, we want to make sure that we're building up that neural structure for kids to be able to handle things on their own when they are on their own, which will happen one day soon. It sounds like you have a problem. I know you can handle it. What are your options? How can I support you while you do it? I know we can figure this out together. What's worked for you in the past? What strategies are you going to use? Just remember this, the main goal of parenting is building resiliency. If we solve all our kids' problems, they will not have a chance to develop a picture of themselves as competent on their own. All right, so I know a lot of you are here for this, so let's talk about it. We want to talk about media literacy. And how can we do this with girls? Well, we want to help our daughters recognize that things are not as they appear. We want to sit down and have discussions with them about social media. Who created this and why did they do it? Who is the target audience? Who paid for it? Who's getting paid if you click on it? Who might benefit from this message? Who could be harmed by it? What's not in this Instagram feed that might be really important? Do you think this is credible? What makes you think so? Check your emotions as you're scrolling. How do you feel after you were on that feed? How do you feel after you were on that app? If what you're seeing or reading makes you feel angry or left out or self-critical or despairing or even superior or better than, hello, that's a sign that you're getting played. And talk openly about negative online experiences, bullying and being targeted with weight loss ads and images in which girls are sexualized as if they're women. So, of course, we want to set some boundaries around social media. Look, even a 16-year-old may need serious help in contending with the toxic messages that are blaring out of smartphones. We want to have age-appropriate oversight for when and why a device is being used so that it's not serving as this amplification system for the body's stress detection, for the brain as a threat detective. When teens are using smartphones in bed, there's no alone in the dark. Remember, there is no one there to help them interpret or respond to what they're hearing or seeing. And let's go back to what we said earlier, that what's seen visually is felt emotionally in the body and creates a physical response. And that starts the message when we're revved up into fight, flight, freeze. I should be afraid. I don't measure up. Nobody likes me. A phone that dings at night with texts and alerts, that is a amygdala alert system that goes off every time a teen's body and mind are trying to calm down. So pediatricians told me while I was writing Girls on the Brink that most families never have a conversation about social media. Pediatricians feel like they're the ones who have to bring this conversation forward and they have to be the ones to encourage parents to talk about it. So some ways to establish some limits with social media: talk about it, agree. Phones and devices are out of the bedroom by a certain time of day. No phones during meal times. Guess what? Kids are more likely to share their deeper feelings, including their problems and concerns and fears, when they're eating over meals. So please, 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 during meals, put those phones away. Turn off app notifications. Come up with time management agreements about time spent on social media. Talk about the discomfort that might happen for all of you when you decide collectively as a family to put your smartphones away. Walk up to the problem. Make sure that you are creating healthy boundaries, deleting, restricting, blocking, limiting comments, turning off all comments. I can tell you on my phone that this is 0 notifications. I literally do not want to hear it. And diversify the kinds of feeds you follow so that you're seeing all types of body images and shapes and colors and sizes. And ask your daughter to prioritize her time on her smartphone with what fills her with good energy and delete those accounts that deplete her. Now, a new study just came out a few weeks ago from the American Psychological Association, which gave us a lot of insight into how important it is to set those boundaries. Slashing screen time to 1 hour a day led to significant improvements in how girls felt about themselves. Now, everybody says to me, this is impossible to do. And ideally, parents do this in a community as part of a school community or a neighborhood community or a friend community, so that no one feels left out or stigmatized. But we want to create a sense of camaraderie around this structure, including social media structure, so that it becomes part of your family's positive identity. Hey, this is the way our family does things, rather than a demand or a chore. If we can attach some of these boundaries for social media to a deeper layer of meaning and identity as a family, it is more likely to stick. So also that means we have to watch how we're using social media. And if you catch yourself picking up your phone, watch yourself how often you're doing it. If you are with your child and you're on your phone, that very well could be a moment when they're about to spill something that you need to know. Just turn around and say, hey, I shouldn't be doing this right now. We're together and you're so much more important to me. We also want to move away, as I said, from being that fixer or that detective or telling kids how things are, what we think about things, and moving more into a language around wondering. When we are able to build in a language around wondering, we help build all kind of awarenesses within a child, and especially a sense of relational awareness. Now, relational awareness involves awareness of what I feel, awareness of what you feel, awareness of my relationship with nature, and my sense of belonging to something bigger than myself. And if we move our language from telling kids what they should do or fixing things or being the detective or asking them questions, and instead bring in this language of wondering, we begin to instill in them a sense of curiosity and wonder, and we invite them to look inside. And over time, when we do this, and I'm going to show you how to do it in a second, that means that a girl's internal sense of right or wrong becomes the voice that she's more likely to listen to versus those opinions and those examples that she's seeing on social media. So when kids are really little, it could be as simple as, what did that story we read make you think about? But as they grow older, oh, are those girls all hanging together at school? I wonder why that clique is suddenly forming. I wonder why your friend Tanya is drinking. And sooner or later, your daughters will adopt this language of I wonder and come to you with, I wonder why Emily sent a selfie of her cleavage to Henry, or I wonder what more we could do about climate change. And when we shift to this sense of wondering about the world around us rather than opining on the world around us, we're turning that locus of control on within our girls so that they are more likely to feel that they can come up with answers on their own and do something more about the world in which we live. We want to really help girls bounce back from ruminating. Ruminating, as we talked about earlier, is that caught state of thinking about what one has done wrong or what others have done wrong. And the longer that time span is that ruminating keeps going, that stress threat response is activated, the more that stress response shifts into something that's harmful. Letting go of what ifs can be really challenging for teens. You know, their brain can get stuck on that rewind and replay, and it can be hard to change the channel. And we really have to help them with that, especially since social media algorithms drive rumination. Now, we saw earlier in the slide about positive childhood experiences that one of the #1 protective factors is these consistent, reliable, supportive relationships with caring adults. And this can be a grandparent, a teacher, a counselor, a social worker, a coach. We can really help girls by asking them to name the adult women that they would feel safe approaching if their parents weren't available, and help to create the conditions so that they can spend time with those mentors in their community. I've heard from so many girls over and over and over again that having a strong female benefactor network helped them feel physically and psychologically safer and better about themselves. We think of this as a sense of belonging, and it is a key protective factor against psychological distress. There is a magic in mentoring relationships. The girls I followed for 2 years told me over and over again about that one mentor who literally saved them. It was the teacher who offered them a safe, quiet place to come during lunch. It was that counselor who took that extra time to get to know them and read their poetry. It was that older adult woman who stepped in and told them they were really, really, really good at something, they were worth something, and they internalized that feeling that they were worthy. And over, I've heard if it weren't for that one person, I wouldn't have made it through that difficult time in my childhood. Now, I've interviewed a lot of older women as well, women and men, and I can tell you, even decades later, individuals recall who it was that made them feel seen and valued, even if that adult was just in their lives for a very brief period of time. And the great thing is that mentors and teachers and social workers and counselors are all in their professions because they care about kids and they're in a unique position to help. So we also have to really battle stigma regarding mental health. I know you all are doing your series to help with that. Stigma around mental health is a real barrier to care, especially since youth rely on their parents to initiate connections to care. I like to ask parents, please normalize therapy in your own homes. If you're headed out to see your therapist, say, hey, I've got to go get my tune-up. I'll be back in a little bit. Really helps make me feel better. And I think it just makes me a better person. I'll see you when I get home. We also need more school counselors. Of course we do. We seem to have lots of money for shooter drills, but not enough money for school counselors. And remember, as parents, that when you feel that your child is maybe going to be stigmatized, if you reach out to teachers and ask for their observations or for their help, remember that teachers are often the ones who are seeing signs that you can't see at home. Parents tell me that they often hesitate to reach out because of this fear of stigma, the fear of being judged, or being seen as responsible for their child's struggles. And I really want to encourage you to reach out if you have concerns, not just about your child's grades, but maybe their mood or their anxiety or their friendship dynamics. Some schools have started a great trend called Handle with Care, where on the first day of parent-teacher conferences, they send home a little message in backpacks. Hey, if your child's having difficulties, I would like to provide extra support. Just send me a little note that says Handle with Care. I won't ask any questions, but I will just be aware during the day that your child needs a little extra time and attention and help and understanding. I think that we should share our concerns about our child's mental health with teachers and with the school as if we were sharing our concerns about our child's physical health with their athletic coach. I'm a big advocate of therapy. Most of the girls that I have interviewed who've really turned that corner toward thriving benefited from therapy. Parents often feel they have to go it alone. Moms especially tell me that they feel that they're to blame if they can't fix something. We want to act when issues are still relatively small, but unfortunately, we often wait until there's a real crisis before we get outside support. We have very good evidence now that therapy reduces inflammatory factors in the body. In fact, a meta-analysis of 56 studies showed that psychotherapy is consistently associated with improvements in immune health, and this lasted for 6 months or longer. All right, so we're just got a couple more slides. We want to make sure that we're giving adolescents a chance to have a mastery curve experience. This is one of the most important developmental scaffoldings that they can have under them. Feeling good about ourselves is also shaped by our experience of feeling competent. This could be rowing or creating films or learning pottery or glass blowing or carpentry class or sports or kickboxing or gardening or any kind of activity that is self-desired, self-driven, and self-motivated, we can see really helps with neural scaffolding in the brain. And here's a great trick. I know that Katrina talked about her love of journaling. I teach a narrative writing program at universities, and I teach it online for individuals, helping to kind of break some of that ruminating thinking. And I also have exercises for girls, and I want to share this one with you because I think it's really very, very helpful for the girls that I've spoken with. Set a worry timer and tell her to spend 10 minutes writing down all of her negative thoughts on paper, including any anger she feels toward other people or situations. One rule, she's not allowed to write anything negative about herself. That is not allowed. Then at the end, suggest she tear that paper up and throw it away. It's important she knows no one is going to read this. You're not allowed to go and try to pull it out of the trash. And then ask her to spend 10 minutes thinking about how she might be able to make meaning out of her experience and what served her well in the past that might serve her well now. What are her internal and external resources? And she might want to tear up and toss this page out, or she might want to save it for a future reference. Earlier, I talked about the importance of managing our own stuff. It's really, narrative writing is a very, very, very powerful tool for adults too. I know because I've taught thousands and thousands of people this process. The goal is really to help recognize and override your brain's sticky thought patterns and internalize stories and create this new, more relaxed, healing narrative that really can help reset your body and brain and bring down your nervous system so you're more able to be available for others in your life, but also more available for yourself. I think it's a vastly underutilized tool in the healing toolbox. Okay, last thing, girls tell me that parents are doing too much of the talking. They often tell you that everything's okay because that's what you want to hear. They want to tell you what they're worrying about, but they worry you might not be able to handle it. Please believe them when they tell you that they're struggling. They want to be extended the simple courtesy of belief when they confide hard things. They have resilience fatigue. It's hard out there. It's harder than you think. Stop expecting them to bounce back from everything. They worry that you want them to push through, be brave, be resilient, get past them. Please tell them that their mental health matters more than their determination. They want to be online less. They want you to be on your phone less too. Talk about it. Start bringing in those boundaries. They know you love them. They really do. But they want you to show that love by noticing their intrinsic qualities more than their grades or appearance or accolades. It's not your fault, even when they act as if it is. Forgive them when they act out. Sometimes you're the only person with whom it's safe to off-gas their emotions. They don't feel really safe or secure in so many ways, and they want to talk about it, and they're struggling to find the right words. And that takes us back to the beginning of this talk. So the work starts with us. Here's a little bit more about the program that I teach for parents and caregivers. And please stay in touch. And I'm going to stop my share. I know we ran a little late. We all have a little more to offer up than we had time for, but I promise I'm not running away. I'll sit here and answer questions for as long as we can stay awake.
So the first question is that does the type of social media app that is utilized impact the effects that it has?
Not really. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok we think is the most addictive, even more than Instagram. Girls don't tend to be on Facebook too much. They're on Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. Not really. The messages are the same.
Thank you. And then a question for you, Katrina. Thank you for sharing. You seem very self-aware. Did you get help in understanding your anxiety?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I'm glad that it was asked because it was one of the things I wanted to go over, but of course I was a bit anxious, so I forgot. But I have been going to therapy ever since I was young, and different therapists have helped me through different periods of my life. So they really helped me with what I needed at that time. So I learned a lot about analyzing my thoughts. I picked up on things like journaling. And one thing that's been helpful to me is even looking at my thoughts like passing clouds. So, not looking at them with judgment, recognizing that when I'm having a thought, that doesn't mean that it defines me. So, I've learned to really try to observe these thoughts. And of course, it is about having that self compassion because sometimes it will be harder than others. But yeah, the other big thing for me too has also been sort of being a parent to myself. So, doing my own inner childhood healing, looking back at some traumatic experiences that I've gone through and recognizing recognizing the importance of just having that self-love and self-compassion for myself, really treating myself like a child, just getting in touch with my inner child and yeah, just finding that deep compassion for myself.
Thank you. Another question, does a presentation like this exist for adolescent girls? So the science, the feelings, etc., without the parenting advice. So have you ever presented to a group of adolescent girls, Donna?
Oh, yes, yes. I didn't understand that question. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. I'm so,
No,
yes,
that's
of
okay.
course, of course, of course. Yes,
So
I,
you
yes,
can,
I do talk to adolescent girls. I know that I'm going to, I know tomorrow I have an event with the International Coalition of Girls Schools all across the world, 400 girls schools across the world. And we're all really excited about that. And I am going to talk to many of those schools and talking to the girls in upper school. So yes, I do talk to many groups of girls. And of course, it's a little bit different because they're telling me it's a little more interactive, right? And it should be, but absolutely 100%. Girls are just so fantastic and they're such a joy to be with and learn from. And they really love knowing this science. And they really love knowing that there are ways that they can begin to bring down their own stress machinery. So it's a lot different, right? We're talking with girls. How do you assess your nervous system, that state in any given moment? And how do you get in and do some of the things that Katrina is talking about? But yes, is the answer.
thank you. But, my daughter is 4. At what point do we know if her anxiety is just being 4 versus something that needs extra attention and care? She is definitely substantially more shy, insecure, and anxious than her peers.
So it's interesting. We know that the first signs of anxiety show up around that by age 5, we start to see some of the ill effects of anxiety in kids' lives. And depression is a little later, usually around, as we said earlier, 12, 13, 14. So we don't ever want to pathologize anything, but we also, I don't think, can ever go wrong by asking the question, is there more that we could be doing to help help shift this situation so our child is facing less anxiety in their day-to-day lives? It's better for your child, it's better for your family. And there are some really great ways to do that, right? And often we don't realize the way we ourselves are unconsciously playing into that anxious patterning, something Katrina said a little bit earlier. But I don't think that it's ever too early to ask that question. That is different than pathologizing it, right? It's different than saying this is anxiety disorder. It's saying what help could we have here? What skills, what tools in the toolbox as a family that would help our child to feel safer and more confident in the world? That is always a great question.
Thank you. So somebody wrote that they live in an area where mental health services are not available for children. So what resources exist to get therapy for girls that may need it but have no access?
Yeah, that's really, really a problem that we have. And even in areas right now where we have mental health services, we're seeing waiting times of months and years to even literally you could call 15 therapists in your area and they would all tell you, I'm sorry, I'm full up. I'm not going to have anything for months. So this is a problem regardless of where you live. Economics also get in the way, obviously, because very few therapists accept, insurance for just a $25 copay. Most therapists don't work in network. So the good news is that there are more options online than there used to be. And I think that a good place to start might be to go to the American Psychological Association and reach out to, they have a great online system for putting in your zip code, looking for therapists and seeing if there's one closer than you think or in some way who would work with you virtually. So it's American Psychological Association, put in your zip code, describe what kind of therapist you're looking for, and a lot of people will come up. Of course, the very best way is to go through your school system and ask for referrals that have helped other girls with situations like your daughters. Teachers know, counselors know, they know who's out there, and they may have solutions for you that you haven't thought of.
Thanks, Donna. And then the final is just a thank you for sharing such personal experiences and professional expertise. So thank you, everybody. We will send you the recording of the webinar and really appreciate everybody being with us tonight. And thank you to the Miriam Fund for continuing to fund. There's also in Massachusetts, there is a new program through community behavioral health centers that guarantees a therapy intake within 48 hours. So you can find that on the mass.gov website. So it is a hospital diversion program and it is a useful resource. We will also be sending a survey that we would love for you to fill out. So thank you all so much.
Thank you again for having me, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye.